I'm going to give a little bit of a sample lecture. What we're going to talk about in the next 20 minutes or so is what is religion? So what do we think religion is? Why does it matter? How we define what religion is. A lot of people think religion means the same thing or looks the same in a lot of different contexts. But if we look really specifically, it's actually very different and means different things to different people. So we're going to look a little bit into that today, and then we're going to do that by specifically looking at two cases from the European Court of Human Rights that dealt with the issue of religion in public life, religious symbols in public spaces, in particular in schoolrooms. And what I want to try and encourage us all to do with this lecture is think more critically about what religion, the concept, as well as the practice is and what it does, who gets to decide what religion is, how and why do they decide what religion is, and what are the circumstances or the issues or the factors that contribute to them deciding to define religion in one way and not another. And then what are the consequences of that? What are the implications for our laws, for our policy, government, and for people's lives? So maybe if people feel like it, maybe if you can throw in a few of your own ideas in the Q&A section on the platform. So what is religion? What do we think religion is? Maybe you might have your own experiences, your own practices. You might be religious yourself. Just send in a few thoughts about what you think religion is, and we'll talk a little bit about that and some of the broader ideas about what religion is. So I'll give you just a couple of minutes to maybe send in a few things about what you think religion is. Okay, so a belief that there is a force that connects us in some way. Believing in something, a God, a faith, something that can't be proven by science or by people. Okay, so it's really interesting. Both of those responses emphasize this idea of belief, that religion is about believing in something, in a force or a God. So these are some quite common ways that we think about religion. So a belief system, a belief in God, a belief in a supernatural power. But religion, as well as being about beliefs, it can also be about practices. So things like going to church or to a mosque or some kind of religious service, engaging in rituals. So the burial of how we deal with people who die, and how we honor, how we recognize death, or how we celebrate births and how we celebrate marriage and things like these. These are all rituals that are kind of connected to different religious practices in a way. Belief in life after death, or how we deal with death, is often a common feature of different religious traditions. But then, of course, there's the question, is religion all of these things, or is it only a few of them? And it really does depend a lot on where you look and what context you're thinking about, the time period, the culture. So another question that this raises, though, is how is religion different from something like politics or ideology or culture? If we say that religion is a belief in something, you can believe in communism, you can believe in capitalism. So how is that different from believing in a religion like Christianity or Islam or Judaism? And maybe that has to do with this question about life after death. Maybe that's one of the factors. But the thing is that a lot of the time there's really no agreement amongst scholars about how we should define religion and about what makes religion distinct from other areas of social life. And there are some scholars who would actually say that that's because religion is what we would call a construct. It's something that's made up. So this whole category of religion is something that we use as a label to distinguish and cut off certain areas of human life from others. And it's an exercise of power. So I won't go too much into that because we talk about that in our courses here, and I don't want to spoil it for you, but we look a lot at how the idea of secularism and the secular constructs an idea of religion. And then another important thing to think about is what are the things we should take into consideration when we're trying to define what religion is. And so they are things like looking at, if we look at a community in Indonesia, for example, what are the practices that they engage in on a day-to-day life? Do they have a concept of religion, and how do they define what religion is? How do they think about death? How do they think about life? What are their values? What's important to them? If we take that to a broader level, at the level of policy or of law, we have to think about what the boundaries of religion are. Where is the divide between religious institutions and state institutions, for example, and how do we manage that divide? And that's one of the reasons why it matters how we define what religion is, because how we distinguish this line between religious institutions, between secular institutions, between religious practices, religious symbols, and cultural or national symbols, state symbols, this can really make a difference for how people practice their beliefs or manifest their beliefs in public life. And that brings us to the two cases from the European Court of Human Rights that I want us to quickly take a look at for today. So the first one of those cases is a case called Delab v. Switzerland, and it's from 2001. And the second case was Lautzi v. Italy from 2011. And both of these cases were about symbols in public school classrooms. So we'll get into the details of the cases in just a second, but I'm just going to show a couple of images. So you can see this image on the screen now. What are we looking at? Maybe you can throw in a few quick comments. What do you see on your screen? What's in the picture? Okay, so Anita says 2 Muslim women. Mariana says 2 Muslim girls wearing a headscarf. How do you know they're Muslim? We know they're Muslim because they're wearing headscarves, and we associate the wearing of a headscarf with Islam, with being Muslim. There's a lot of Muslim girls who don't wear headscarves as well, and there are a lot of women who will wear headscarves in a different way and in a different style, but who are not Muslim. So this is already something that we need to recognize, that we have this idea of what it means to be Muslim, and particularly a Muslim woman, and that is wearing a headscarf. So, second image, what do you see here? What's this picture showing us? Jesus on the cross, a crucifix, yeah. So, of these two, the crucifix and the headscarf, are they religious symbols or are they cultural symbols or political symbols? What do you think? Anita says both religious and cultural. So how do we distinguish between what is religious and what is cultural? This is a really interesting question, where we draw the line between what is religious and what is cultural. And this was exactly what happened in these two cases that we're looking at now. So in the Delab v. Switzerland case, and that's a picture of the European Court of Human Rights that you can see in the corner there. If you ever have to go there, that's what it looks like. The Delab v. Switzerland case was about a primary school teacher who she converted to Islam while she was working as a teacher, and she began to wear a headscarf in the classroom while she was teaching. She never said anything about her religion when she was teaching, though. Her students would ask her why she started wearing a headscarf, and she told them that it was to keep her ears warm. She never said anything about Islam or her religious beliefs, but she started to wear the headscarf. Now, the Geneva authorities found out about this and they ordered her not to do it, not to wear the headscarf in the classroom, because according to them, it violated the principle of denominational neutrality in education. So the classroom has to be neutral when it comes to religion, and her wearing a headscarf, according to them, violated that principle. So she argued that them saying she could not wear the headscarf violated her right to freedom of religion or belief. It violated her right to manifest her religion. So she took her case to the European Court of Human Rights under Article 9 of the European Convention. And then the European Court was called on to rule whether this was a violation of neutrality of the classroom or it was a violation of her right to manifest her freedom of religion. And the point came down to whether the headscarf is a religious symbol or not. And we'll get into that in a sec, but I want to first of all then compare the Lautze case and what was at stake there. So in the Lautze case, Miss Lautze is, I believe she's still alive, she's an atheist, and she sent two children to a public school in Italy. And in the public school, crucifixes were displayed on the classroom walls. So Miss Lautze argued that the display of the crucifixes in the classroom were a violation of her and her children's rights to freedom of religion or belief. The school board rejected this argument and they said the crucifix was an important cultural symbol in Italian public life and they left the crucifix where it was. The case was then fought through various levels of the Italian court system and all of them rejected Miss Lautze's claim, which led to her eventually taking her case to the European Court of Human Rights, which in 2009 upheld her side of the argument, said that it was a violation of her and her children's rights to freedom of religion or belief and that the school should remove the crucifixes from the classroom. The Italian government, however, appealed this decision, and in 2011, the Grand Chamber of the European Court of Human Rights found in favour of the Italian government and the crucifixes could remain. Again, the question in this case hinged on whether the crucifix was a religious symbol or not. So let's take a look at the two rulings and what they have to say about whether the symbol is religious or cultural. So in the Delab ruling, so this was the case about the primary school teacher and wearing a headscarf in the classroom, the court ruled that the headscarf is a powerful religious symbol, and these are quotes from the court's ruling, violating the principle of neutrality. They ruled that the headscarf has some kind of proselytizing effect, even although Ms. Delab did not mention her religion to her students, and influenced the freedom of conscience of very young children. They also argued that the headscarf is imposed on women by the Quran and undermines tolerance, equality, respect for others, non-discrimination and democracy. Again, this is taken from the ruling itself. In the Lautze case, by contrast, the court ruled that the crucifix is an essentially passive symbol that does not violate the principle of neutrality. They said that there was no evidence that the display of a religious symbol on classroom walls may have an influence on pupils, and they also ruled that it is a religious symbol, but it's also a cultural symbol, part of Italian cultural heritage, and evoking principles of democracy, equality, non-violence, and justice. So in both, if we look at the two cases and how they've been dealt with, one is deemed to be only a religious symbol. That's all it does, and it's a powerful religious symbol. So it's going to affect the freedom of conscience of very young children, even if nothing is actually said about what this symbol is and what it represents. The court also engages in a theological exercise because they say that the headscarf is imposed on women by the Quran. So they're reading what the Quran says and arguing that from a theological standpoint, this is something that is imposed on women. That is something that is contested by a number of Islamic scholars. In the Lautze case, they didn't deny that the crucifix was a religious symbol, but they also said that it was a cultural symbol and part of Italian cultural heritage, which enabled it to remain in the public sphere. They also said that it was a passive symbol and that there was no evidence that it would affect the freedom of religion of very young children. Now, if we take both of these symbols, the headscarf and the crucifix, and we think that both of them are in some cases religious, in some way a religious symbol, the way in which the court deals with both of them is very different. Now, partially that's to do with the different contexts in which we're dealing, but it's also to do with the power relationships between different religions within the European public sphere. So Islam has less of a history within Europe, and it is currently not the dominant religion. Arguably, it's currently quite discriminated against. And this potentially impacts the way that it is dealt with in legal cases. The reverse is the case for Christianity and Christian religious symbols. These have a strong history within Europe. They've become entangled with cultural and national identity, and so they occupy a very different place in the way in which laws are read and interpreted and then enacted. So looking at these two cases shows us that religion means different things in different contexts. It shows us that the way that we think about religion rather than think of religion as something we can easily see, we should think about religion as a concept that is defined and differently by different people according to different factors. In these two cases, it's a question of the relationships between states in the European public sphere and individuals. It's a relationship between what is religious and what is cultural and how we draw that line. And then the other issue that is at stake here is that the power to define what religion is has consequences for law, for policy and practice, and this has a real impact on people's human lives. Mr. Laub and Ms. Lautzi both felt that their right to freedom of religion or belief had been violated, and in both cases they lost. It was the state's right that was upheld. And so these issues really have significance and really play out in the everyday lives of people, and that's why it matters. And these are the kinds of things that you study as part of a degree in religious studies. You'll learn much more about the history of Islam and the history of Christianity, both within Europe and beyond, in Asia, in the Middle East, and you'll be able to analyse these kinds of questions and issues for yourself in contemporary politics and society. So that's the end of the sample lecture. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you in Qaurian studying the BA in Religious Studies.